Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining today's webinar. My name is Tobias Komischke, and the title of today's webinar is How to Assess User Experience. So let's get right into it. About me, I'm the Director of User Experience here at Infragsitics. I work in services. I studied the UX stuff, whatever that means, because UX is a very big field. I have a couple of years of experience. I worked in research, I worked in development, I also worked in consulting. And I always show this image here up front because it's the first thing I ever saw about user experience. Or back then, it was just called usability engineering. And I think it still depicts very nicely what we try to accomplish out there, which is avoiding those weird situations where somebody is completely lost, doesn't know where he or she is, what happened, and then somebody has to help him, and it may hopefully not be this alien, even though he's asking the right question. So obviously we know our audience, we know who's joining our webinar series, and so we're always looking for content that we hope is relevant. So at Infragistic Services, we have a pretty good feel for that because we work in many projects. We work cross-industry, we work cross-platform. We do user experience design, so meaning usability, interaction design, visual design. We have specialists in development. We do consulting, we do training. And so we hear a lot of questions that our clients have. And we try to address them. And what we bring to the table is heavy expertise into the design aspect of a development project. So, it's hard to define what user experience is. There's dozens and dozens of definitions for it. I like this one here. It just says the envisioned, expected, or actual experience of a user interacting with a technical product. That is user experience. Why I like it is because it means that whether or not you think it's relevant, whether or not you invest in that topic, there will always be an experience. A user will have an experience, no matter if you plan or design for it or not. So it's basically making the choice between really having users that are happy, that feel that they can accomplish their goals, or users that are frustrated and angry and then shout at their system. So for all of you, and that's, we know the majority of the participants today that are not designers, not UX people, but that may be developers, business analysts, product managers, project managers, C-level people. For all of you that are not directly responsible for UI design, you oftentimes find yourselves into meeting situations where somebody shows you a UI, and then in this kind of review meetings, you are still asked to provide an opinion about it. Oftentimes, you have the situation where you are not shown a UI, but you still want to see it because you may be responsible for the whole project. And so what we see in those situations is there's kind of three types of people in those kind of review meetings. This one here is the first one. It's the happy guy. It's those people who are just very happy with what they see in your UI because it just means there's progress. If there's a UI, there's progress. Now, the next person is what I will call the polite, indifferent person. They are like, yeah, it's not my job. I'm a back-end developer. I'm not responsible for this, so I don't know what to say about this, and I don't really care about it. That's fine, but again, it's not really helpful. And then there's those people that have a really strong opinion about things, and obviously, if they are happy and satisfied, that's good. But if they are not, they will let you know. They will be very verbal. And so for all these three personas out there, this webinar is about giving some guidance, some checklist items, so that whether or not you are deep into UX or not, you are more knowledgeable about assessing something that you see, a front end, and that can be just a concept design. This could be a mock-up or a prototype. This could be a running system. But what I'll try to do is give you a nice checklist of things you can look at. And obviously, these are all screen level design checklist items. It's not really helping you to understand, are we building the right project or the right product? It helps you to identify whether you build the product the right way. And so these items here, I'll go through, and then hopefully you can take them away and memorize them and apply them in your project environments. Surprisingly, the first item of the UX checklist are usability checklists. So there's this one ISO standard, 9241. And of course, people don't like standards that much. They are dry and boring. This one here, though, I think is rather important because, as an ISO standard, it's agreed upon on a global level. So this really defines what usability is on a global scale. And there's already countries out there, such as the UK, that has translated that ISO standard into a national law. So you can, as an employee, sue your company if you can prove that they violate design principles of that ISO standard. But for us, all it does is it gives us a set of principles that when you meet them, it means you have a usable system. That's a good start. What it does not do is covering all aspects of UX. It only covers usability, but usability is not everything that is UX. So what's not covered in that standard is things that are talking about the emotional tie between a user and the product, such as joy, pride, desirability, attractiveness. That's not really covered, but we'll talk about that at a later point. So let's look at these three principles. They call them dialogue principles because it's a dialogue between a user and a system. And the number one is the one that I like best. It's really important. It's task suitability. So a UI is suitable when it supports the user in the effective and efficient completion of the task. And that can mean a lot of things, but what it means is you should always think about how is the user going to use your UI and what can you do to support that. And one example is that you place the cursor per default where you expect the user to put something in. So for example, here in this screenshot. Now that sounds completely trivial, right? So all of you will think, oh right, I do this, no problem. How else would you do this? I mean, isn't that logical? Well, let's look at the reality out there. So I was checking websites, or Amazon, Target, Walmart, and then the three predominant search engines. And I was just interested in how many times after I load those pages, how many times do I have to hit the tab key to get the cursor in the search field, which for Amazon is here. And turns out I used Google Chrome, but there's also numbers here for IE9. For Amazon, like the biggest online retailer out there, it takes you 15 times. You have to click the tab key on your keyboard 15 times to get the cursor in here if you don't want to use the mouse. And that is just a violation of what we just said earlier, which is if you know that it's an option for people to actually enter a search string, you want to put the cursor already in there, considering that here and for all these here, there's only one to begin with. There's only one field where you would put text in. So why not put the text, the cursor already in there? So Amazon is a terrible solution. Target, still terrible. Walmart, it's 2 tabs I have to do. And now look at all the search engines. They do it right. There's nothing you need to do. You type in google.com and then you can type right away your search string in. Nothing else you need to do in terms of positioning the cursor into the field. So even though it sounds trivial, it's actually not followed consistently out there. The next dialog principle from the standard is self-descriptiveness. A UI is self-descriptive when each dialog is immediately comprehensible through feedback from the system or is explained to the user on request. This one here is a classic but very evident example, the print range selection that you have in Word and PowerPoint and all those tools, where you can determine slide ranges that you want to print out. And it's not trivial how to put this in, how to explain to a product that you want slide 5 and then slide 17 through 20. So this solution here gives you a hint right where you need it and when you need it. So if I say, show me only selected slides, it shows you how to enter this, that you have to have commas and dashes in there. Now, purists would argue, well, at this point, when all is selected, I don't even need this information. I would only show it once this one here, slides, is selected. And that's true, and it's fine. But still, it's good to have that information here at this spot and not somewhere hidden in an online help where you actually have to leave that context here and hunt for that information. So that is an example of self-descriptiveness. So if somebody shows you a UI, these things are things that you can look into. Is it suitable for the task? Is what you see self-descriptive or not? The third one here is controllability, which means something is controllable when the user is able to initiate and control and also abort things that go on the UI. So for example, in this situation here, where something is not responding anymore, if there's long processing time or lag time because something is being pulled from a server, or there's latency due to rendering issues, the user has to be able to set the pace. It's the user controlling the system and not the other way around. So controllability is another one of those principles. Conformity to user expectations is the fourth one. A dialog conforms with user expectations when it's consistent and when it's corresponding to the user characteristics, such as what the user knows about the task he or she is trying to solve, the education of the user, and prior experiences and conventions. So it really doesn't matter too much if you first have the primary action and then the secondary action. So first okay, then cancel, or if it's first cancel or okay, or even first show help and then okay and cancel. If you measure these things in performance testing, as long as they are consistent within the application, it really doesn't have a real impact on performance. But you do want to be consistent, and I guess you should also be consistent with platform conventions. So in the Windows world, typically you have the primary action, the positive action, okay, before you show the secondary or the negative one, cancel. In the Apple world, it's oftentimes the other way around. Number 5, error tolerance, and a dialogue between the user and the system is error tolerant if, despite of errors in input, you can still reach the attendant result with either no or minimal corrective action by the user. So here, this is Avis. I tried to sign up for their car rental special service, and they didn't allow me. Back then, we had extensions to our phones, and they didn't allow me to use extensions. Whatever I tried, here using a little X or just combining the main number with the extensions, I tried every single format on the planet, and it wouldn't accept it. So this is not an error tolerant dialog. While on the other side here, on the right side with Google, I mistyped. For weather forecast, I accidentally wrote an R instead of the T at the end of forecast, and Google didn't worry at all. They actually asked me if I actually meant forecast, but even without me answering, they actually gave me all the search hits for forecast. So that's pretty error tolerant here. Number 6, suitability for individualization. it's good to provide individualization features to users so that they can tune the UI to their needs, depending on what the task is, their preferences, and skills. And number 7, suitability for learning. A dialog is suitable for learning when it supports and guides the user in learning the system. So obviously, one big goal of user experience design is to transition users from novice users to expert users. And learning is obviously the progression. And so learning is important. And other dialog principles that we talked about earlier, such as self-descriptiveness, support this one here. So these dialog principles you can apply right away. If somebody shows you a UI, you can just think about, well, how suitable is that for learning? How suitable is that for controllability? Is it really helping me with the accomplishment of a task? I will not go through all of these here, but I just wanted to mention that there's kind of famous heuristics out there. And after the webinar here, we will provide links where you can access the webinar and review it. And then you can check this out in more detail. Here's also a link where you can find it. This here is a list of 10 criteria for good UX from Jacob Nielsen, one of the guys who helped really found the whole topic of usability engineering. And then there's also another list. It's Schneiderman's 8 Golden Rules. Ben Schneiderman, also a known guy in the UX field. Just another set of rules that you can just apply. If somebody shows you a UI, you can just go in here and say, well, it says here, offer simple error handling. Well, let's look at the error handling. What happens if I do an error? How does the system react to me? Can I still, without interrupting my whole workflow, without shutting down the application, can I still recover from that error? Now, if you see something that looks like these two screens, so something that looks a little bit unorganized, a little bit cluttered, a little bit overloaded, and a little bit rich in colors, many different colors, that's a good indication that there's a problem. And it's very interesting because in UX, a lot of times when something looks professional, it is perceived as usable. And if something doesn't look very professional, it's perceived as not usable by users. And here there's a lot of research results that indicate the same kind of relationship. From an aesthetics perspective, research shows that people have a need for structure, for symmetry, for predictable layouts. And the more is shown, the less aesthetic something is rated on the UI. So from an aesthetics perspective, if you have a rating and you have test persons that you ask to rate the attractiveness or the aesthetics of these two screens, they would rate them low because it's hard to see a symmetry in here. And a lot of things are shown. Well, for human factors, and this is like more things that you can measure in a hardcore way, the Princeton University, which is just around the corner from our office here, their neuroscience lab did some studies where they pushed people into fMRI scanners and showed them imagery of clutter. And then they did some, analysis on that, and they came up with a research result article that basically said in the end, in the summary, that visual clutter restricts the ability to focus because it's hard for the brain to know what to look at, to distill what's signal and what is noise, what is important and what is just infrastructure and non-important visual items. And then they also said clutter limits the brain's ability to process information. So the bottom line is both from an aesthetics perspective, just like how you feel when you look at these screens, but also from what you can measure, how well you and your brain can cover with those kind of screens. It shows that overloaded screens are really bad. And so this is a good finding, but what does it mean? How can you take care that you can manage clutter? I will talk about this in a second. But this is just something for you to consider when you look at a concept or a screen or a prototype, how cluttered is it? Do you see a very clean layout or not? The other thing is something that is oftentimes considered very boring, which is everything surrounding text legibility, how easy it is to depict what a text actually says in terms of recognizing the letters. Because people always think, oh, isn't that solved? You know, are we not beyond this topic? And we are not. Forrester Research, they do longitudinal studies, and they review thousands, literally thousands of websites and try to see where the problems are. And they are basically saying that text legibility is still the one single biggest issue, at least for websites, that they can just, you know, scan and analyze. And there's a lot of issues with how you can treat or mistreat text. And one is contrasts. And this one here is a screenshot from the Usability Professionals Association. They just renamed themselves last year into UXPA, just to give more credit to, you know, the fact that we now talk about user experience, which is a little bit more holistic than usability alone. But see what they did here on their home site, on their homepage. I'm not even sure if you can see this in the streaming, but here's a link that says sponsor the UPA job bank. So it's actually a call to action. It's actually something that should result into money that they get, but the contrast is so bad that you cannot even read it. So that's a real problem. It just shows if the Usability Professionals Association can make that kind of mistake or slip, anybody can. So think about contrast. The other thing, obviously, for text legibility is the character sizes. And I say character size and not font size, because I really mean the physical size. If you had a ruler and you would measure the size on a screen, that's what character size is all about. And there's a lot of confusion out there because nowadays we have such an explosion of different monitor sizes and tablet sizes and phone sizes. So a lot of times we see, especially on the larger form factors, texts that are way too small. And so here are recommendations that actually stem from the same ISO standard that I've shown you before. And they're really based on hardcore ergonomics and, you know, what we can actually see physiologically. And it basically says for handhelds like smartphones, tablets that you have relatively close to your eye, you want to have at least a character size of 1.4 millimeters. Computer monitors, that viewing distance is a little bit larger, obviously. You want to have 2.33 millimeters. And for example, projection walls where you are further away, we talk about 12 millimeters. And that's just the minimum. The actual optimum is even larger, but you rarely see that applied because it really consumes a lot of screen real estate. So, but this one here is the minimum, and you can check that. You can measure that with not necessarily with a real physical band, but you can use tools like Photoshop to check for that. Again, switching back to contrast, this is just a table that shows good foreground, background color combinations that don't provide a contrast that you know, blurs your screen or makes it hard to see what you're looking at. But it's just an overview. What I recommend is using tools such as this, and the web is full with them, that actually allows you to pick colors, foreground and background colors, or put in hex codes for them. And it will actually return whether you pass or do not pass guidelines such as the web accessibility guidelines, you know, version 1, version 2. I think there's also tools out there that check for Section 508 compliance, which is more US-centric. So just you know, go to sites like those and just check if the color contrast is sufficient or not. And then it's really about fine-tuning it. If you fail those tests, well, your feedback should be to the people responsible for the UI, for the visual designers, for example, increase that contrast. And hopefully they have the same tools available and can then tune their UI. Another big issue revolving around color usage is everything that's called color perception deficiencies or color blindness, depending on how detailed you want to talk about this. So basically meaning that there are a number of people out there, about 8% of men and 0.5% of women, that have some issues with perceiving hues in the right way. And you can drill that down in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different detail levels, but it boils down to the fact that mostly there's a problem with perceiving red and green, and it's usually men that have that issue. And so this is here, the second row in this table. It's the problem of perceiving red-green in a right way. Most of the times then people confuse red and green. And that is something that you should keep in mind because the other incidences here, the problem of perceiving blue and yellow or perceiving any hue at all for the total color blindness is really, really rare. So we talk about here 4 out of 100,000 men and 3 out of 100,000 men for the total color blindness. So it's really rare. So if you want to cover your bases, think about the red-green color deficiency. And that basically means that you should not rely on the color information alone if you want to differentiate elements or if you want to convey certain meanings for UI elements. You should multi-code items and not only rely on color. And one way to do that is you use also shapes or icons or labels. And I'll show you an example in a second. These are just this is an example of a project that we ran where our client wanted to use the traffic light metaphor to show if certain test results passed or failed or if there was an error. So that means using green, red, and yellow. And it's very interesting because if you focus on mitigating the risk that people confuse red and green, that is fine. But then if you do that and if you simulate what people with color deficiencies would perceive, and here is the example of somebody with red-green color problems, you see that the green specifically goes a lot into the what we as normal sighted people would see as a yellow, and then you actually have a problem with the original yellow. So a lot of fine-tuning is required then to actually make those 3 pie chart segments distinct, although you may not see the right hues. This one here, the next screen that you see, is a screen that won the Nielsen Norman Usability Awards, I think in 2008. It's a server surveillance product. It really doesn't matter what it does, but one of the reasons why they won that award is because they triple-coded their relevant items. So here, look at these triple coding. One coding level is the color. So red for critical, green for okay, and yellow for something that needs attention. And they didn't stop there, but they also put in a shape information. So square versus triangle versus circle. And then they also put an icon on top of that. So here it's a cross, here it's an exclamation mark, and here's a check. So triple coding things, that's really a very nice solution. And you not always have to do triple coding, but just remember not to rely on color alone, because 8% of men and about 0.5% of women have trouble seeing hues the way that normal-sighted people do. And again, here's a tool that I can recommend. It's called VisCheck. Here's the URL. There, it allows you to upload images that you have, and then you can say what kind of color deficiency you want to simulate, red-green or blue-yellow. And for the total color blindness, you can just go to even PowerPoint and put it to grayscale to see the results. But this one here will output then your images that you upload simulated for those deficiencies. And then you can see and check, are still all the UI elements, all the content readable, perceivable, and understandable when the hue information may be skewed. So it's a very nice way to do that. And these are all free tools. You can just use them as they are. What you can also check if somebody shows you a UI are things like text alignment. And granted, nobody would die if some of these recommendations are done the wrong way, but there are best practices and they have been studied and they are so easy to follow once you know them that I think it's a good thing to discuss them here. So what we see a lot of times is that the labels to the input fields are left aligned so that you have one straight line down here on the left, but you have an uneven spacing here between the labels and the text entry fields. So left aligned labels, and that's not a good thing to do. The reason for that is, and this has been shown through eye tracking studies, if you have very uneven lengthed labels, there's quite some eye traffic back and forth between the label and the input field, just to understand what you're supposed to do. So this one here is for left aligned. Look at the same situation if the labels are right aligned. Here you see much less eye traffic because the labels are closer and they're always in the same distance to the text entry fields. So where's that slide? This means left alignment is not as good as right alignment. Right alignment, again, shorter distance between label and field, and it's a consistent distance. That's a better solution. So that's a good thing to right align things. What you can also do is to top left align the labels. That has also been proven in eye tracking studies that it has the same efficiency in terms of filling out a form. The added benefit of top aligning labels is in terms of localization. If now we had to translate that labels into languages that need more real estate, such as Italian or German, here you have enough real estate to actually have the text expand properly for different languages, while here you may actually run out of space. You may not have enough space here on the left. So that's top left alignment is a very good solution as well. What you should not do is to align them beneath the text entry field and right align them for the same reason. It's too much visual traffic. Also, what you should not do is actually put in the labels. And the reason for that is no matter what you do here, if you put it in gray or in brackets, people, users, just by seeing that there's something in there, even though it's just an instruction, they think it's already filled out. It's just shown through research over and over again. The other reason why this is not that good is if I fill them out, I don't have that instruction anymore. So maybe I fill out last name and then first name and then the rest of it. And then when I'm at the cell phone, I may look back here to the first two and think, well, did they actually ask me to do the last name first or the first name? And there's no way for you to know unless you actually delete what you just entered and go back to this stage here. So you do want to maintain your labels at any time. So again, it would not kill anybody if you do this the wrong way, but if you can do it the right way, why not do it the right way? It's a very easy to memorize fact, and it's measurably better than these suboptimal solutions here. So remember when I talked about screen clutter and people like symmetry, people like clearly laid out UIs. Here's a more detailed slide that talks about how you can check for it and how you can make sure that it's designed properly. And the magic is called grid-based design. Grids divide the screen into even and predictable areas. And it works on different levels. It works on a macro level. So for example, here, where the design of this website, whatever this was, is based on a grid that was defined before the content was thrown in. So everything now can be laid out to that grid. So the length of the content, you see here the image spans, the 5 central columns here. This one here spans 3 columns. this text here spans 3, while this text here only spans 1. So it's a very good help to know how to map content to a structure. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You see here, this area here is not really exactly spanning 2 columns, but maybe 1.5, and that's fine too, as long as the overall organization here is consistent. The example here on the right side is a dialog from Microsoft Outlook, where you see that the content here again maps very well and very strictly to a grid. So what they did was they defined something that's called an atomic unit, which is the smallest distance between elements. So it's this here, for example, between these 2 buttons, and it's the size of this checkbox. And then the rest of the grid is basically just multiplications of that atomic unit. And you see here everything is very strictly aligned to that grid. And this is now something you can use, because if you have to review a UI, what you can do is try to put in those symmetry lines and see how even or uneven they end up looking, or how many you actually need. So let's do this here, an example for this dialog here on the left, something that is from a real project. If you now put in those symmetry lines, what would it look like? Do you think it will look like here on the right side? Do you think we need more or maybe less of those lines? Here is what it looks like. And you see the unevenness. It's very uneven. Here in this area, I have a lot very close to them. Here, hardly any. And so it's very hard to see any repeatable pattern here. And if that's the case, it's a good indication that the layout of that dialog or the website or whatever this is could be optimized. So for you as the reviewer, all you do is try to put these lines in. If it looks like this here on the left, just tell whoever is doing the design, well, go back to the drawing board and make it in a consistent grid-based design, and then you can check again. It's a really nice to use heuristic. And again, there's tools out there. This one here is an add-on that you can use for Firefox that will overlay any website that you throw at it with a grid, and it helps you to determine whether it's a predictable layout or not. But again, you can use just a ruler and a pen to do this, even on a paper. Now, this here I showed you at the beginning. This is what we try to avoid. And one very high-level rule that you can apply to those situations when somebody shows their UI is asking these 3 questions from a user's perspective. Where am I? Where have I come from? And what's next? If you see a screen that doesn't answer those 3 questions, that's a warning sign. That may be a problem. Because a screen should be able to tell you what the screen is all about. This is the where I am. So what am I looking at? What can I do? What am I supposed to do? But also, where have I come from? So now I'm in a very large system that has hundreds of screens. I am now looking at one screen. Do I understand where I am in the flow of other screens that I may need to look at? And then what's next? Once I did whatever I need to do on that screen, do I understand how to go about submitting that screen or doing the next logical step? So if these 3 questions cannot really be answered on any screen that you're looking at, that's a warning sign. And things to mitigate that is obviously the classics: use of labels, provide user guidance. The classical way is wizards that are really out of style today. Fixed navigation, click targets, using breadcrumbs to show where you've come from and what you can do next. All these things are options, but the important thing is really to ask those questions. Now, I would think that probably most of you, 95% of you, are not designing icons, but You may be in the role of ordering icons. You may be in the role of working with an icon vendor and then reviewing those icons when they come back. And then how do you rate the quality of an icon other than saying, I like it or I really hate them? The question is, why are they good or why are they bad, and what can you do to be productive in your feedback? So this one here is a little framework, very easy, just 3 aspects, but it's based on, again, research. A good icon is concrete. It has a low complexity level and a low or a small semantic distance. So what does that mean? Let's start with concreteness. Concreteness refers to the degree of the pictorial resemblance of the icon to the real world's counterpart. So here, the more the better. Obviously, the more concrete, the better. If you have a very abstract icon that has no real counterpart in the world, it takes longer to understand what it's there for. While this one here, okay, you see paper, you see a paper clip, okay, there's something out there in the world that exactly looks like this and also does the same thing. So concreteness is good. Now the second one, complexity. Complexity is actually not good. So the richness of the details that the icon depicts should be low. And why? Well, one reason is here you see when we decrease the size of an icon, you cannot even show and see all those granular details of that camera, for example. So the only thing that you have left is basically the prototypical shape and the lens, that's all. So here, the less is more. Try to have those people who design icons really work on prototypical depictions and don't focus too much on all those details, unless you know that for now and in the future, you always have very large icons. If you know that you will always have 72 by 72 pixel icons, fine. Most of the times though, especially for line of business applications, you don't have that luxury. And then you really want to reduce complexity. And the third one is the semantic distance, the closeness between what the icon is showing and its actual function. So here the less is more. All those more symbolic icons are obviously of high semantic distance because they are abstract. But in that case, if you have to use those, you want to make sure that you use those that have established semantics. So this one here is a pretty standard icon, which means cancel, abort, delete. And just when you see icon sets, ask those 3 questions: how concrete are those? How complex are they? And is the closeness between what they show and their function large or small? What's also nice to look at is what are the salient parts of a UI? What is signal and what is noise? Is that easy to understand or not? And I go through these a little bit faster so that we have more time at the end to have a QA. But what you can do is you can simulate what aspects of a UI are more prominent, more salient than others. And there's also a tool that allows you to simulate that. And if you go to this website, fenggui.com, they allow you free of charge to upload 1 image, I think, a day. And then they return you a heat map that simulates where people, humans, look at in kind of the first fifth of a second. So it's pre-attentively, it's before they actually start thinking about what they're looking at. If you want to know that, you actually have to do eye-checking studies. That will be much more expensive and take much longer time. But if you just want to know what is most prominent on my visual scene, on my UI, this here is perfect because it's free, it's super fast. And actually, obviously, this is a service. If you want to pay money to these guys, then you can do as many heat maps a day that you want. But it's free for 1 a day. And it's really helpful. Let me show you how we use that. This is a tool that we once built. And this is one scene where we overlay the background with a detail light box that has more information. And then we had this close button here on the top right And usability testing revealed that people had a hard time to see that close button. So what are the options? Well, we could place that close button closer to the middle. We can change its color to make it more prominent. We can change its size. There's lots of things we can do. But the first thing was we really wanted to check with the saliency modeling if it's really that hard to see it based on this algorithm, this impartial third-party algorithm. So we run that screen through fenggui.com, and we got this heat map back. So the more red the heat map is in one area, it means the more prominent it looks, the more visual attention it draws. And you see here, based on location, based on things like shape and foreground backgrounds, color contrast, this center content here drew the most visual attention. And then it was the beginning, the left side of this text, and then it was the right border of the text. But you see that our poor close button here didn't draw any visual attention. So the findings from the usability test were right. And what we did was we just changed the color of the button in this alternative here and went through the same algorithm. And guess what? Now there is some attention drawn to it. Not as much as the center here, but there is attention drawn to it. And so that's just very interesting how that heat mapping works in that context. And you can use this, just use it. If you want to see what, from a saliency perspective, is signal and noise on the screen, run it through that heat map, and then you can see it actually maps the intended signal and noise, because maybe the designers wanted to draw the attention to a completely different area of your UI. Now, all these guidelines and checklist items I've been talking about so far were something that, you get some inputs, a screen, a concept, a prototype, a system, and you look at it, and then you make an informed opinion, because most of that stuff is really research-based. And that's fine. It just enables you to talk in a more well-founded way about things. But in the end, it's not you, it's not me who really determines the success or failure of a UI or a product. It's the actual users. So at the end, I just wanted to introduce usability testing as the single best way to check a UI for a good UX. Because unless those checklist items I provided to you before, usability testing is empirical. It's not based on you and your knowledge. It's based on real test participants, real target users that engage with your concepts. Now, that implies that to some degree those concepts should be more or less interactive. Obviously, you can test even paper prototypes, but if something is more interactive so that you at least can click on selected click targets, even though it's just fake in PowerPoint, it helps because it makes the experience a little bit more authentic and realistic. So usability testing is about engaging with real users. It's about having those real users engage with real tasks from the real target environment and not something made up. It's about checking prototypes and or real products. It's employing a technique that's called thinking aloud. It basically means you ask those test participants when they engage with the system that you want to test to at any time verbalize their thoughts. So rather than looking at them engaging with your screen and then just trying to understand what they are doing, is have them verbalize what they are doing. So they would say, okay, I'm now at the home screen and I know that I want to look for the product X, Y, and Z. Well, I don't know what this product shall be. Well, I'm seeing there's a menu on top and I see that one of the menu items talks about services, one talks about products. Yeah, I guess it's products, but I'm not really sure. So if they verbalize these things, you have much more insight into their issues, what works and what does not. And then what you can get out of usability testing is qualitative data, which is everything that is like their opinion, what their perception is, but also quantitative data. And that can be the numbers of errors that they did while they tried to solve a defined task, the number of times when they got stuck. They just didn't know what to do now, and you had to help them. You can do performance usability testing, where you say, well, act as fast as you can to carry out certain tasks, and you just take the time. And you can see then across your different iterations if people get better and better and faster with the accomplishment of a task or not. What's nice about usability testing is that you don't need to churn through hundreds and hundreds of test users. This is research by Nielsen from the 90s, and it shows that the number of identified usability problems is a curve of diminishing returns. So it's actually enough if you just engage with like 8 test users and you find about 80% of usability problems that are in the system that you're testing. Now, I've been asked a lot of times to run tests of 20 or 30 persons. And I mean, yes, you can do that, no problem. But you see with this log curve here, if I test 20, I still only get maybe 90 or 95 of all problems. So you spend a lot of time and money and really don't get that many new identified problems. So it's more cost efficient to do it with less and fewer users, and then maybe just do more of those tests, maybe every test for every iteration or every sprint that you churn out. So that's something you can do. And again, it's empirical. And you can use usability testing for a lot of different reasons, a lot of different places in your development lifecycle, for product optimization, for decision making, for benchmarking. You can do comparative usability testing, your concept or your system against the best in class from the competitors. And obviously it's very strong in convincing stakeholders, because now you don't talk about opinions and gut feelings anymore, but about facts. And again, you want to do this as early as possible, because at the beginning of a development life cycle, when the design alternatives are still plenty, the cost of changes to do the due diligence on the results of the usability test are cheap. While later, when you talk about, we set up with the architecture, we have coded things, we are like 2 weeks before deployment. If you want to do changes then, it's very expensive, because your design alternatives are not there anymore, because you already have built things in code. This year, I actually wanted to show you a little bit a movie about a usability testing scene, but it showed the streaming was not fast enough. So here's just a screenshot of a usability test that we ran on a pattern on a controls browser before we launched that. So this just shows the scenes of a real developer that we got from a user group engaging with our envisioned browser and just like solving problems, telling us very verbally what works and what does not. And then we fine-tuned the concept with that feedback and feedback from other people. So this is what I try to convey in this webinar, just a quick UX checklist. And I really want to encourage you to try to apply that, even though it's not your job maybe to actually build the UI. It may very well be your job to review a UI for its quality. And UX is a huge part of the quality. Try to apply those quick checklist items. Ask the question, well, have you done usability testing and what was the outcome? That's for the empirical evidence. And I hope this is practical for you. Now, again, we will make the slide deck here, the recording of the webinar accessible for you. But at this point, if you have a question, please use the Q&A tab on top to ask that question, and then we can basically use the remainder, or like the last 5 minutes that we have here, to go through that question. And I just see one of the questions was that whether the recording is accessible, and it will be. Our marketing folks that also send out the invites, they will also send out the links. We will not share the PowerPoint itself. We only share the recording. Let me see. It's quite a list of questions. What are good questions to address here? How does Fengui create the heat map? It is automated using some modeling. Yes, exactly. So I admit I went a little bit fast through that part because of the time constraint. But yes, it's based on a saliency model. It's the same model that radiologists use in the hospital when they try to interpret the images from an MRI study. You know, when they put you through the MRI, it creates like 300 slices of your body. And they don't rely on the radiologists alone, but on those saliency models to say there is something in the screen that is different from other screens. So that salient parts, that is based on a model. So that's why I like it, because it's pretty impartial. I mean, whether I believe or not that something is prominent on the screen, this is based on a model, so it's impartial. But again, it only models the very first exposure. It does not substitute or get rid of eye tracking. But it's good just to say, what would the first thing be that hits the eye of a user? Here's a question. Amit asks, is responsive design better in the age of web design? And well, that's a very good question. It's a question that a lot of our customers have, but it's not a very easy question to answer, because it really depends on what the objective and the strategy is that you follow with your design. Obviously, if you know at the onset of a development project that you do want to provide a UI across form factors, you do want to have your target audience to access your product on a smartphone, on a tablet, and on a PC form factor, then I think looking into responsive design makes a lot of sense. But a lot of people out there are not there yet. So what they want to do is maybe they just want to port a COM project to a web, and then only when they see if that was successful, if they have enough traction out there, they then want to do the next step. So I think it really depends on the project, but I love responsive design. I really think it's super, super powerful. And I think it came up like 2 years ago or 3 years now, in 2010. There has been so much progress done since then, all these responsive templates that you can use. I think it's really, really strong. Here's a question from Esteban. There is additional considerations for the checklists in case of mobile UX. Yes, I did not really have specific guidelines for mobile UX, but it's a good hint. It's a good call to action that we should probably provide that. We did a webinar last year about smartphone UX that had a little bit content for that, but I would still think that most, if not all, criteria that I showed today applies to mobile UX the same way, because screen clutter, text size, color combinations, all these kind of things, even usability testing, making sure that people can engage with a mobile device, I think it applies pretty much one-to-one. Terry asks, what weight does the finished site, for example, Photoshop treatment, have on the overall UX rating as compared, I have to just, I don't see the rest, as compared to usability concerns? Okay, what weight does the finished site have on the overall UX rating as compared to usability concerns? Okay, so if the question is what changes in terms of perceived usability once you actually have Photoshop treatment and everything looks super pixel perfect, right color treatment, brand integration, glossy colors, it is quite some impact. I mentioned earlier that something that looks professional is perceived by persons as more usable even before they actually started to engage with it. And that means that something that looks good, it's well designed, Photoshop treatment, exactly like you say. Something like this will usually get higher usability ratings, but this is before people use it. And that's why you still should run those usability tests, because the tests, the real empirical usage will unveil if it's just eye candy or not. So even if something looks great, if people cannot cope with it and they struggle with understanding labels and meaning and navigation and structure, it will unveil it that way. But I think it's a very good question in that obviously Photoshop treatment, visual design that is attractive, modern, contemporary, and functional is integral to any UX design. That was basically this missing part of the ISO standard that only cared about usability. UX is usability and visual design. Okay, I'm sorry that I couldn't answer all the other questions. There were quite some. I wanted to thank everybody for attending. Again, the slides will be made, the recording will be made available by our marketing people. Feel free to review. If there's any questions or follow-ups, I had somewhere my email address. I think it's here. Yep. Sorry for that weird name. Feel free to shoot me an email for any, comments, critiques, things that you liked or did not like. Other than that, thank you very much for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.